the United States of America, one of the most powerful and influential countries in the world today. But how did we get here? To answer that question, we need to go back to when the United States was just starting to take form as an independent country. Let's go all the way back to 1789. This was the year that George Washington was elected into office as the first president of the United States of America. Without the leadership of the first president and the first cabinet, we wouldn't be as powerful and influential of a country as we are today.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and I will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The election was a little different back in 1789 than it is today. The new Constitution stated that the president should be elected by electors from each state. Each state was to have as many electors as it had representatives in Congress. Each elector voted whom they wanted as president, the votes were counted, and the person with the highest number of votes became president. The person with the second highest number of votes became vice president. The winners of the 1789 election was George Washington, and the runner-up was John Adams, who consequently became vice president. The land covering the United States was mostly forests. Only in a few stretches such as southern New England and the middle states were there large areas of cleared land. The population of the United States in 1790, according to the first federal census, was around 4 million people. Most of the people were farmers and only a few lived in cities. In 1789, there were just 6 cities with a population over 8,000: New York, Boston, Charleston, Baltimore, Salem, and Philadelphia being the largest with over 42,000 people. The roads after the Revolutionary War were not very good. Most of the roads were dangerous to travel on, and even the best roads were slow and expensive to travel on. Most Americans, therefore, lived within 50 miles of tidewater, where waterways provided a cheaper and safer passage. Westerners depended on the Mississippi River for trade and transportation. The people who traded grain converted the grain into whiskey, which was a more compact and portable form. The mail service was practically non-existent. The average letter took about 3 weeks to arrive to the receiver of the mail. It would be a long time before the United States developed the transportation system that we know today. The traditions of royalty and expensive taste didn't stop in England. There were many good opportunities for an enterprising person in the United States to move up the social ladder. The American aristocracy consisted of wealthy merchants from New England and Pennsylvania.
Unlike in England, you couldn't be born into wealth and prosperity. You had to earn it in the New World. This was just the beginning of the American dream. And anybody could work there, their way up from the bottom, all the way to the top.
The federal government owed a massive amount of debt to the French, to Dutch bankers, and even to its own citizens. To make the government well respected, they would have to pay off those debts. Congress also decided to have a census every 10 years so that they could fix the number of seats for each state in the House of Representatives, since seat numbers are based on population for each state. Congress also needed to organize territories, establish federal courts, and regulate trade. So there was a lot of work to be done before the United States could fully prosper. The first action was to set up a federal court. The Judiciary Act of 1789 established a federal court known as the Supreme Court. But perhaps the most important step taken was the setting up of all the departments. These include Treasury, State, War, and Attorney General. For the Department of Treasury, George Washington chose Alexander Hamilton. Edmund Randolph became Attorney General, Thomas Jefferson became Secretary of State, and Henry Knox became Secretary of War, which is known as Secretary of Defense today. These 3 departments would serve a crucial role to the young country of the United States. Hamilton's report on public credit included the U.S. national government paying back all debts, state and national, and Hamilton was only concerned with building national credit. Some didn't want to pay back private creditors, and some believed it was wrong for people to profit from the war. Some states had already paid debt and didn't want to pay others' debt, but Hamilton convinced them, for he was only concerned for building national credit, and all of these would help build national credit. Alexander Hamilton also wanted a national bank. The bank would serve as a way for the government to collect taxes, and it would provide a safe place to keep the nation's money as long as lend the government money when needed, and it would also create a paper currency. Thomas Jefferson, however, opposed the bank, and he wanted the country to be based on farmers, not merchants and bankers. Hamilton also wanted a tariff to keep out European goods to allow growth of the American industry. Farmers opposed it because the tariff would make prices higher for their farming goods, and the tariff was never passed. Alexander Hamilton also wanted a national bank. The bank would serve as a way for the government to collect taxes, and it would provide a safe place to keep the nation's money as long as lend them government money when needed, and it would also create a paper currency. Thomas Jefferson, however, opposed the bank, and he wanted the country to be based on farmers, not merchants and bankers. Jefferson argued that since the Constitution did not mention a bank, national government can't do it. Hamilton argued that government can do anything necessary and proper to run itself. This was broad versus strict Constitution, and Jefferson supported strict Constitution while Hamilton supported loose Constitution. Britain refused to carry the Treaty of 1783. They had trading posts in the U.S., and their agents in Canada were also giving guns to the Indians. Full-scale combat started in 1790, and America got completely destroyed the first time. This left the Northwest open to the Indians. However, France was a greater problem. France was our strongest ally, and they decided to start their own revolution. Our country still wasn't capable of going to war at this time. France also had a big leadership change, and we took that as we didn't need to uphold the treaty started at the Revolutionary War. We also didn't want to help at this time because of their poor human values, due to beheading and a lot of executions. Later, a Frenchman named Genet was sent to America to try to get us to help them in the revolution. Our country was still split in the decision on whether to help the French. Washington wanted to help the French since they helped us win the war, but he also felt that the country was too young to go to war. Then, Washington, in spite of the mass beheadings, signed a proclamation that stated that we were neutral to each side. The treaty still didn't help us with the British. The British were still seizing American ships and capturing our sailors. This was known as impressment. Jay was sent to try to make peace with Britain. However, the British didn't want to sign a peace treaty. The one really positive point Jay had won was England's agreement to leave the frontier fur posts in American territory. Nothing at all was done about the disputed boundary between Canada and the United States, and the damages for ships seized by the English, or the debts Americans still owed British merchants. These items were left to a joint commission in the future. Then there was a farmers' rebellion on whiskey tax. They held a rebellion on the tax of whiskey because they didn't like being taxed on whiskey because that was their main export. Washington called out a militia and the rebellion stopped almost instantly. This showed the power of the new government. Washington then stated his farewell address, and he served 2 terms. Then, John Adams became vice president, and Jefferson was the runner-up, so he became vice president. When John Adams became president, he was now left with the difficult task of guiding a young nation divided by party strife at home and endangered by war in Europe. John Adams was from Massachusetts, and he served in the Continental Congress and served on many committees. He negotiated a peace treaty at the end of the Revolution and served as vice president to George Washington. He also favored a strong central government. John Adams kept the same members of Washington's cabinet. They didn't agree with Adams, and they were mostly loyal to Alexander Hamilton. French ships began attacking American ships, so America sent ambassadors Marshall, Gerry, and Pignacy to France to negotiate a treaty. This was also known as the XYZ Affair. France demanded $10 million and a $250,000 bribe to Minister Talleyrand just to talk with the U.S. America responded, millions for defense, not a cent for tribute. America and France had an informal naval war between 1798 and 1800. Napoleon overthrew the French government and agreed to peace with the U.S. Surprisingly, no courts ruled against the Alien and Sedition Acts. However, Virginia declared that states could rule a law unconstitutional, and Kentucky declared states could declare law null and void. Madison and Jefferson believed states had more rights than federal government, and they were both behind the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. In the election of 1800, Jefferson and his vice president Aaron Burr tied for the win. Jefferson was elected president by House of Representatives. The 12th Amendment passed to separate voting of president and vice president. This election showed that power can peacefully transfer between political opponents. All of these events were instrumental into the forming of the United States, and it paved the way to form the most powerful country in the world today.
I wanna be your vacuum cleaner, breathing in your dust. I wanna be a Ford Cortina, I will never rust. If you like your coffee hot, let me be a coffee pot. You call the shots, babe, I just wanna be yours. Secrets I have held in my heart are harder to hide than I thought. Maybe I just wanna be yours. I wanna be yours. I